Hello everybody, welcome back to my YouTube channel. Today's video is one that I don't think I have ever filmed a video like this before. I have been on YouTube for 12 years and I don't think I've ever talked about one of my absolute favorite things, which is reading. I have been an avid reader for years and I've gone through like waves of, being in a reading rut and not knowing what to read, but I am known in my family as the person that always has a book, and Barnes & Noble has been my favorite place for years. It's like my comfort place. When you walk in somewhere and you just like feel safe and comforted and familiar, that is Barnes & Noble, because I have made my family spend hours in that place when I was younger. So I'm shocked that I haven't filmed a video like this, and I am so thankful that talking about reading and books and your favorite books are a trend. So this year I was like, I'm gonna make it a goal and I'm gonna read 40 books. But I didn't reach my goal. I am on book 33 this year. I am going to go through and I'm going to go through every single book that I read this year, give you my little synopsis, my rating, my review, and I'm going to break it down into categories. I read a lot of fiction, business/productivity books, and then I also read a lot of nonfiction. For years, I have been a very big nonfiction reader. I did not read fiction since maybe I was really young, like middle school or high school. But in the past few years, I was like, you know what? I've been seeing so many more people talk about their favorite fiction books and romance books, and it made me miss my love for reading when I was a little kid. So I started reading fiction this year and I do not regret it. I think I was in the mindset that if I read fiction, I wasn't being productive. I was like, okay, if it's not productive and it's not making me smarter, then it's a waste of time. I'm too busy to be reading fiction. Meanwhile, I'll sit down and binge episodes of a TV show. For me, it's not necessarily about being productive. It's about enjoying what I'm reading and getting so captivated by a book. And I don't know, it's kind of like a release for me. So if you are someone that has kind of lost your love for fiction, or maybe you've never read fiction because you're scared that it's not productive, trust me, it is such a good escape from the real world and anything you're working on. And it just makes reading way more fun. And at the very end, I'm going to be ranking my top 2 best books and my top 2 worst books of the year. Of course, I have my notes section with all of the books that I read. Okay, we're gonna start with fiction. The very first book that I read first week of the year was One True Loves by Taylor Jenkins Reid. This book is about a woman and her husband. They're perfect together, they're great together, and then the husband gets, I believe, lost at sea or in a plane crash or something. I don't remember all the details right now, but he gets lost for years and he's presumed dead for years. So she is obviously grieving her husband, and then eventually she ends up falling in love with this other man, and this man that, she's known for years in her childhood, and she ends up getting engaged to him, and that he is also an amazing guy. Turns out her husband is not dead. He ends up coming back, and she's in this dilemma of, who do I choose? My husband, who I have been yearning for years, or this guy that I'm engaged to that I also really, really love? And in my head, I was automatically, you gotta go for the husband that was lost, that came back for you, that was never dead. The way that Taylor Jenkins Reid writes her books, it just makes you the characters feel so real. They don't feel like it's a character in a book. It feels like a real person. And that dilemma is so hard. And so it's just such a good book of deciding who should she choose. And I'm not going to spoil anything, obviously, but that book made me cry, because it's you just feel for all the characters. You feel for her, you feel for the 2 guys. You just have so much empathy for all of them. And it's so good. I gave that book a 4-star rating, and the only reason I knocked it down a point was because I thought it was pretty unrealistic that someone could be lost for years and live off the land and then come back and fight for his wife. I don't know, I just thought that was a little unrealistic. But like I said, the love story is so great and the characters feel so real, even if the situation is unrealistic. The next book that I read was The Silent Patient. This one is about a therapist who is going to an insane asylum, and his kind of job and one mission is to make this one lady who has been there for years, who has never spoken a word, to get her to speak and tell her story, because she was a seemingly normal woman and she randomly one day shot her husband in the face and shot him dead. This book I was really excited about. I've seen it all over Instagram, I saw it all over TikTok, and it's like a thriller, and I love thrillers. And for some reason, I just like couldn't get that into it. Like I thought that it was a little slow to get into. It wasn't scary, and I do like a thriller that like makes me a little like spooked, and this one like didn't feel scary at all. Like I felt like I was just kind of like waiting to see what the plot twist was. And I will say the plot twist was very unsuspecting. Like I did not see the plot twist coming. I think it would do so well making it into a movie. So I gave it a 3.5. I wasn't obsessed with it, but I did think that it would probably make a good movie. The next one is also a thriller, and it was The Last Thing He Told Me. This one has been made into a movie, but I haven't seen it yet. It's a story about a guy who, they live a normal life. It's him, his wife, his daughter, very seemingly normal life. The daughter is at school one day. She's like leaving soccer practice or something like that. She opens her locker and there is a duffel bag full with money and a note. The note is a very cryptic note from her dad. And then she comes home and her dad's not there. And so pretty much the story is about trying to find out what happened to the dad, because his wife and his daughter, like he wouldn't just like up and leave us. Like something had to have happened. And it's one of those stories where she like goes to his work and it's like, this guy hasn't been working here. What are you talking about? And it is, the first half of the book was amazing. And then we got to the second half of the book, which by the way, I read this book in one day. So all of this was happening to me in a few hours. I was like so invested, like I needed to know what happened. Second half of the book, I think kind of fell off a little bit and honestly like didn't make sense with the first half. Like I felt like I was reading two separate books. I absolutely hated the ending and got like visibly angry at the ending. I wanted to like throw the book away. So that's why I gave the book 3 stars. The next book is called Pineapple Street, and this book is kind of just about this wealthy family that lives in Brooklyn Heights on a street called Pineapple Street, and they have kids and they live in this like uber wealthy world, a kind of like Gossip Girl, if you will. And it's about kind of just like their lives. So each one of the kids has kind of like their own story. It's pretty much just a character-driven book that then has some character development at the end. And while I think the character development was like, they had a lot of development, they tried to make some of the characters seem very altruistic. I just felt not as like altruistic as I wanted it to be. Like I didn't think that the characters ended up being as good as maybe they thought that they were. So I thought this book was okay, but I gave this book a 3-star rating. The next book is Daisy Jones and the Six. I was so excited to read this because Taylor Jenkins Reid, as you guys will be able to tell, is one of my favorite authors. I think that she writes stories so beautifully and like she makes you never want to stop reading. I read Daisy Jones and the Six in like 1 or 2 days. Like I literally sat down on my patio one time and I just read for hours. I thought Daisy Jones and the Six was so good. It's about a story of a band from the 60s or 70s, and they are just this like rock and roll band. Think like Fleetwood Mac. I think it was inspired actually by like Stevie Nicks and Fleetwood Mac. It takes you through their life through an interview. So they are being interviewed in present day, decades after they've already broken up, and they're being interviewed about their time in this band. It's so incredibly good. Like I can't even tell you why I thought it was amazing. I just think it was like, again, such a good character-driven book, but also that has such an interesting plot. Like you want to know what it was like to be in this band, versus I think Pineapple Street, I didn't have that like longing to know what it's like to grow up in this like uber wealthy home in Brooklyn. And I absolutely loved it. So I gave this book 5 stars. Next book that I read was Adelaide. It was a book of the month book. This book was a really good example of what a toxic relationship looks like. It's about a girl who is American, who moves to London. She falls in love with this British guy. And it really shows you 2 sides of the same relationship, when one person is super invested and the other one does not care as much as the first one. Kind of like a situationship today, where one person is like, I'm so in love with them. I, makes excuses for them whenever they don't text back, makes excuses for them when they miss events, makes excuses for them for everything. And then the other person is just not that into it. Like it's not. And they become toxic though, because they like, the benefits of a relationship without having that same like commitment, and, their heart's not in it. And so I think it shows a really good description of what a toxic relationship can look like. And you feel for the character Adelaide, because I think she can be any one of us girls, How many of us have been in a situation where we want the guy to like us so much and they just don't, and we're making excuses and we're, saying all this stuff and they just don't. Whereas this shows you how entering a relationship like that with someone that not only doesn't care about you, but actually can end up being toxic. And I thought it was a really realistic example of what toxic relationships can look like. And I gave the book 4 stars. Next, I read Seven Husbands of Evelyn Hugo, which is another Taylor Jenkins Reid book and has gotten so many amazing reviews. I was expecting this book to be another 5-star book. The way that it's written is similar to Daisy Jones and the Six, where someone is interviewing someone else. So it's this journalist in modern day time that is going to interview Evelyn Hugo, who is this old Hollywood actress, kind of like Elizabeth Taylor, who it was actually inspired by. And she has had 7 marriages. And so she's never spoken to the public about it. She's never, written a book about it. And she's finally selling her rights to like her story to this journalist. It's written in the point of view of like the journalist asking Evelyn questions. And then there's also parts of the book where it has like the journalist's story and like what the journalist is going through in her present day. And I thought the book would have been so much stronger if we just removed the journalist aspect. There was also a plot twist at the end that involved the journalist, which I didn't think was that great of a plot twist. I didn't think it like added to the story. I just thought the book would have been so much better if it just focused on Evelyn and not the journalist. So I actually gave this book 3.5 stars. The next one is another Taylor Jenkins Reid book, and it is Carrie Soto is Back. This book I thought was so amazing. It is about a tennis player who was like a world champion. She has the record for Grand Slams, and then someone comes in and beats her record. So Carrie, who is the tennis player who won all these championships, comes back to reclaim her title as having the most, wins and championships. And she's a lot older. She's like, I think in her 40s now. Like, she is not in shape to become a world champion, but it shows you her training, her stubbornness, her cockiness. Honestly, she's kind of like a bitch, the character, but yet it's one of those characters where you're just like so captivated by her. Like, you don't know if you like her or not, but you're like so captivated and you just like want to hear more. And I didn't think I'd be interested in a book about a tennis player. I'm not someone who like is invested in the tennis world, but this book was so good. Stop reading it, and I want this book to be a movie. I think it would do so well. And again, Taylor Jenkins Reid just does such a great job at being character driven, but also having a plot that, is still interesting, but you want to like learn more about the characters and you like can't take your eyes off of them. And it will make you want to go and play tennis. Like, I restarted my tennis lessons after reading this book, and this was another 5-star book for me. The next book is A Little Life, and this one is so controversial. Oh my goodness. This is a book that when I picked it up, every single person DM'd me and was like, this book is going to destroy you. Oh my gosh, it destroyed me. And I was so excited to get this like emotional book, and I was so excited to read it. Okay. It's about 4 friends. One of the characters is definitely the more like the main character, like the protagonist who the book revolves around, and he is someone who is disabled. But no one knows like how he became disabled. He has a very like strange upbringing where he doesn't talk about his parents. He doesn't really have parents. He's come, didn't have any money, and he's kind of like a mystery. And his friends, his closest group of friends that he met in college, don't know anything about his past. Like, he won't talk about his past, but they love him for who he is, and they have like a really strong, solid group of guy friends, and it's the 4 of them. This book then shows, them going from college to into their like 50s and 60s, and mainly circles around this one main character who has this past that he is so traumatized to talk about. So you obviously end up finding out what has happened to him in his past, and it is incredibly traumatic. And then what loses me is that this book, you would think, has like one main antagonist, one villain who, traumatized this kid as a little kid. But this person who is, has a very traumatic childhood goes, and as he's continuing to grow up in his adult life in present day, as it like kind of takes you through their lives, has so many bad things happen to him, like an insane amount of bad things happen to him. It's trauma porn. It's not realistic. It's not like adding to the plot. It's like the writer was like, how many evil, traumatic, awful things can happen to one character? Let me do it. And then the book is like 800 something pages. So it's a long book. And it's like, it talks, I think it's like one of those books where there's just so much extra information as well, where I didn't need all of this like backstory or all of these random characters. And I felt like the writer was just trying to traumatize us with how many bad things can happen to one character, that when you get to the ending of the book, which I don't want to spoil for you, but it made me so angry that at the end of the book, when you find out what happens, you don't blame the character, because I don't think that should ever be something that anyone does. But yet, like, you don't blame the character at the end because of how awful their life was. At the end, I was more invested into it and I like wanted to keep reading. So I did give this book 2.5 stars, but for how many people said this was like an amazing book and it won so many awards, I was like deeply disturbed by this book. And it wasn't in a way that, oh, it's just because traumatic things happened. I felt like it was trauma for the sake of trauma, and I don't like that. The next fiction book I read was another book of the month book, and it was called Banyan Moon. It is about a story of 3 Vietnamese women. It's 3 generations. The grandma has died, and so it's some of the chapters are in like the afterlife, like her looking down on them. And then the mom has, you know, grown up with her grandma and raised her daughter. Daughter is now a grown adult. She's gone off. She's moved to the big city. She like doesn't really speak to her mom as much. They have a strained relationship, and she finds out that she's pregnant. And so then for the grandma's funeral, she comes back. She like sees her mom there. You know, there's this tension there. And it just is a story about these 3 like very fiercely independent women, and the way that like why they are the way that they are, you know, their bond and the complicated relationships of like mother, daughter, and these generations of women. I usually like stories like that. I thought this one was a little bit boring. I think the writer wrote beautifully, like her writing is really nice, but I didn't really think that the plot was like anything that I, you know, wanted to continue to read. It took me months to finish this book, so I did give this book 2.5 stars. Next book, Love and Other Words, and this book was so good. It is about a story of these childhood friends who end up dating, and then they end up not speaking for 11 years and they reconnect after 11 years. And it's that friends to lovers trope, but also with like the distance and then reconnecting. And if there's anything I love, it is a reconnection story. Like I love when, you know, you don't speak for a long time, then you come back together and you reconnect. Something in me just like absolutely loves that stuff. That was one of my, you know, all-time favorite fiction romance books. It again was one of those books where like the characters seem so realistic, and I love reading about realistic love. So I gave this book 5 stars. I thought it was so good. And then the other fiction book that I read is called Happy Place. This is another incredibly amazing book. It is about this couple who has been dating for years. They're in a friend group together. Their friend group takes an annual cabin trip. And so this trip, instead of telling their friends that they broke up, they're like, let's just stick it out, pretend like we're together, not ruin the last trip that we go on, because this cabin like was being sold. And so they go on this trip with all their friends and they act like they are a couple. Really, they are broken up. It is one of those books where it takes place in summer. It's so exciting. I love a good summer read. I think Emily Henry does such a good job at like writing books that you want to continue reading while you're like laying in the sun all day. If you have recently gone through a breakup that was amicable, like a breakup where you love and care about the person, but you guys just like aren't meant to be together, this is a book that you need to read. I cried while reading this book. It just reminded me so much of like my previous relationship and how, you know, we were really good together, but like things just didn't work out. And you were just like rooting for these characters in the book, and I'm not gonna spoil it obviously, but it was just such a good book that you just didn't want to finish, and it felt like such realistic love. And I think if you can't tell from the theme of this video, I really like realistic love stories, so I gave this book 5 stars. Now we're gonna go into the business books. So I'm gonna be quick with these because I know that these are very, very particular, so I'm just gonna rattle these off and let you know my rating. I read Competing Against Luck, which is pretty much how companies don't just like get lucky, and it's about the jobs to be done theory, which if you don't know what that is, it's pretty much about like building a product and figuring out what your product is being hired for from your customers. I thought it was a really good theory, but you could listen to a podcast or you could read an article and get exactly what I got out of that book without reading an entire book, so I gave it 3 stars. The next one is Fall in Love with the Problem, Not the Solution. This is from the Waze founder, the, you know, mapping app. I thought not only was it so fascinating about how Waze was built, but this book is literally an MBA program into a single like chapter book. It is incredible. It talks about every single stage of a business, how he built Waze, and especially if you are a tech founder, you need to read this book. I think it should be required reading for every single business or entrepreneurship school, so I did give this book 5 stars. Next one is called Build with little lessons from the founder of Nest. He also helped build the first iPod. This book was so good because it was just like bite-sized lessons. So it wasn't like a story or anything, but each lesson he gave some incredible examples from his own experience, and I personally took a lot from it, being the founder of Rella. So I gave this one 5 stars. Superfans is another book about how to build community, and I thought that it was something that was, pretty intuitive for what we were doing at Rella, and it made me feel confident that we were on the right track. But it's also great to just learn how other companies build community, so I did give this book 3 stars. Hooked is a book about how to build habit-forming products, and I love reading about habits. Like, you'll see also I have another habit book in here, but obviously we want Rella to be like a stickier product, and so after reading this book, we actually changed a lot, about what we were doing at Rella, and I thought it was a really good book, so 4 stars, especially if you are the founder of an app. Product-led growth, another one that was very tactical and it was very like purposeful. We again changed a lot about what we were doing at Rella, especially like our onboarding experience, but it's pretty much about how you need to have a product that sells itself versus like a sales team. And I gave this one 4 stars. Masters of Scale, it is with Reid Hoffman. He has a podcast as well. And it was another book that had just like a bunch of lessons from a bunch of entrepreneurs, not just his own experience. So I gave this one 4 stars. I read Traction, which is how any startup can achieve explosive growth. This one kind of read more like a textbook, I would say, but obviously a little bit more entertaining, with examples about how to use every single marketing channel. Really focused on marketing going into the new year. So this one was another one that was extremely beneficial for us as business owners, and I gave this one 4 stars. And then the last business book that I read this year was called The Power of Habit. I love reading about habits. Like I said, I love Atomic Habits. That book changed my life. And this book was more for like businesses, like how habits can transform businesses. I thought that it was like incredibly simple. It could have been incredibly simplified, and he decided to write an entire book on it. Like, I really did not love this book. There's a lot of studies that support like how do we break and build habits. I thought this was a very, very boring book, so I did give it 2.5 stars. Okay, now we're gonna go into nonfiction, which are some of my absolute favorite books because I am a big nonfiction reader. First book is Spare by Prince Harry. You guys, I was so excited about this book. I actually am like, I think Prince Harry and Meghan Markle are treated very unfairly by their family. This book made me like them less, and I feel like a book should do the opposite. I thought that even though I do obviously have incredible sympathy for, his upbringing in the sense of him losing his mom, how he lost his mom, I think they treat his wife incredibly unfairly. I hate the paparazzi. He makes great points on that. This book was just every complaint that this man has had into a memoir. There was no realization, there was no life lesson, there was no like, I learned from this. It was literally poor me, poor me, poor me. Look at how bad my life sucks. And when you are the prince, it is hard for people to empathize with you because yes, there are horrible things that have happened to you. You have everything at your fingertips. You have everything that you want, and he doesn't recognize any of his privilege at all. It's just complaint after complaint after complaint after complaint, where I felt like he needed to go to therapy more than he needed to write this book. I thought that it was such a bad business decision, PR decision. Like, I don't know who approved this. I thought it was horrible. And I couldn't believe that like this was a book that he read and was like, yeah, this is a good memoir. Like, have you read other memoirs? There's always like lessons and learnings and growth, and I just felt like there was none of that from this book. So I did give this book a 2.5 star. I have trouble giving books less than 2.5. 2.5 was the lowest rating I gave books. Next book was The Ride of a Lifetime. This is the Disney CEO, and although I don't really admire or like the Disney CEO necessarily, I did think it was really interesting hearing about how he became the Disney CEO, and it was really interesting of seeing his like career trajectory, and it makes me wonder who are going to be the CEOs and the leaders of these very well-established companies like Disney, because I feel like today we don't have upward mobility when it comes to careers as much as people did in the past. Our parents' generations stayed in jobs for 20, 30 years. They stayed at the same company. Our generation is quitting every 3 to 5 years to get something better. And it's just interesting because he started at ABC, which Disney owns, when he was like fresh out of college, like at the bottom of ABC, and he worked his way up, and I just like don't see people doing that anymore. So it makes me curious about like who are going to be the leaders of the next companies, and what is that career trajectory going to look like? Is it going to be someone starting from the bottom, or is it just going to be someone that's already at the top that they kind of like move over from other companies? But I actually thought it was a really, really good read, and it was so cool seeing how he got there. So I did give this book 4 stars. Next book is The Psychology of Money. This book, it just talks about one, yes, the psychology of money, but also how to, have a better relationship with money. And it's pretty intuitive examples, but really talks about, it emphasizes how lifestyle creep can kind of get you. Like you can, really start getting used to constantly spending more and more and more. And I thought that was interesting, but I did think the rest of the lessons were like pretty intuitive, but it was a really quick read, so I gave this one 3.5 stars. Next one is Becoming Free Indeed, and this was written by Ginger Duggar, who, if you don't know who the Duggars are the family with like 18 or 19 kids from that TLC show, like 19 Kids and Counting. And I love reading about cults. Like, I love reading about cults. I love reading about really strict religious households, and I think it's one of my like favorite topics to read about because it's just fascinates me that some people can be so narrow-minded, or not even narrow-minded, just like can think that way. And although I'm not saying that the Duggars are a cult, that's not what I'm saying, it gives me still like same genre, like sister categories, where I want to know what their upbringing was like. She doesn't talk poorly about her family there, and she talks a lot about the disentanglement of her faith. So not stepping away from the faith, but how she has, taken her faith and made it her own versus just like what her parents said and she believes that. Which I think is something that I've grown up in like a Christian home and I am still a Christian, but there are some things where, I have taken into my own. Like, I don't just regurgitate what my parents are telling me. I have made it my own. And I think that is something that more people should talk about, because we always see these extremes where you are extreme one way, extreme another, or you're like exactly, how you grew up, or you've completely abandoned it. And I think she does a really good job at like recognizing what she doesn't agree with and why, and, what she thinks was wrong, but then also saying like, but I, still have a very strong faith of my own, and this is how I made it my own. I did want to hear more about like her family and like her upbringing, so I found it less interesting. So I gave that one 3 stars just because I thought it was a little boring, but I do think that it was an interesting take, disentanglement versus just like abandoning it. The next one is Stay True. This is a memoir that I really want to read just because the cover was so beautiful, and it is about this first generation Asian American college student who ends up going to school. He meets this other guy who is also Asian American, also first or second generation, but they've grown up incredibly differently. One of them is definitely more Americanized. He's like a frat bro. The other one, still very much has his like Asian American roots and influence. And they become friends, even though it's pretty unlikely because they're very different. They have different interests, but they become best friends in college. Best friend, who is the more Americanized, frat bro guy, ends up getting killed in a carjack in Berkeley. So someone was trying to steal his car, they killed him, and his body was found the next day, and it's incredibly, incredibly tragic. And it just talks about the power of friendship, about, his life and how he's influenced him after that, how much this like friendship has meant to him, and how it's really like influenced his entire life, even, as an adult writing this book. And it was just so beautifully written. I gave that book 4 stars. The next book is called Everything I Know About Love. This is by Dolly Alderton, I believe is her name. And when I say I didn't want this book to end, I never wanted this book to end. Like, I was obsessed with it. I think every single girl in their 20s needs to read this book. And if you like Sex and the City, you will like this book. It's a memoir, so it is about her own life, but Dolly is so funny and so relatable, and her stories are so interesting, and I just wish I had the skill to tell stories the way that she does. It's such a beautiful book, and it's so relevant to any woman in their 20s, and it's one of those books that just like encapsulates girlhood. And if in the year of like the Barbie movie and the Taylor Swift Eras Tour, please add this to your list of books that you're reading. I thought it was incredible, and I gave this book 5 stars. Next book I read is called Love Does. This is by Bob Goff. My friend recommended it to me, and it's just a really cute, simple book about love personified, and it's little stories about what love really is in human form. Doing acts of service and being selfless, and it's just like a feel-good, like warm-hearted book. It is a very quick read, and I did give this book 3 stars. The next book is called Outliers by Malcolm Gladwell. I think I might be the only person who doesn't love Malcolm Gladwell. I don't think that they're anything like incredibly profound. but I want to because I want to be part of this club that like is obsessed with him, but I'm just not for some reason. This book is pretty much about how, you know, success is not just based on talent and skill. It's more about like opportunity, where and when you are born, and luck. And while I agree that success is not just talent and skill, there's like a million other factors that go into it, so that are more important than talent and skill. I just didn't think that this book said anything that was like that I didn't know, I guess. But I think it was an interesting read. But yeah, I didn't love it. I really didn't love it. So I gave this book 2.5 stars. The next book is Single, Dating, Engaged, Married. If you are single, I highly recommend this book. I think it's good for anyone, but specifically if you are single and you're just kind of like being like, God, where is my husband? Where is my person? Like, or you're someone that is like very tired of the dating game and the dating world and you think dating sucks, because it does. This book is really, really good because it's from a Christian perspective, so it's definitely faith-based. But it just talks about why modern dating is awful and how to fix it. And I'm not saying how to fix the entire world and the entire modern dating structure, but how to at least, you know, fix it yourself, like within yourself. And I thought it was a really encouraging book of not to settle and, you know, all of the importances of all of these different stages. So being single, dating, engaged, married, and how each of them is like super significant. I really liked this book and I gave it 4 stars. Next book that I read is called 3 Women. This book follows 3 women in different parts of the country. And one of them is a student who starts, you know, a relationship with her teacher. She's a high school student, so she is very young. Another one is about a woman who is cheating on her husband. And the other one is about a woman who her husband likes to watch her with other men. None of these women I could necessarily relate to in terms of their like outward experiences. However, this author did such a good job at finding ways that like every single woman can relate to these women across the board and how we're not all that different. Also a book about like how women have like passions and desires. I really liked the premise of it. However, I thought it kind of fell flat. I thought that it was kind of dragged on. Like I don't think it was as like powerful as it was meant to be. You know, it didn't really have like an ending. So I gave this book 3 stars. The next book is another faith-based book, and it is Counterfeit Gods. It's pretty much saying how we can, as humans, can make idols out of anything. Like we can make idols out of very good things. Like we can idolize, you know, love and marriage. We can idolize money. We can idolize ourselves. We can idolize our children. We can idolize politics. Like we can idolize, we kind of make idols out of anything, and that's like our nature is to make idols out of everything. But why that leads to just like not being fulfilled. I thought it was a really good book, and also put in perspective of why, you know, we shouldn't be idolizing all of these different things. I gave this book 4 stars. And then the last book, Friends, Lovers, and the Big Terrible Thing. This is Matthew Perry's memoir, and this was the last book that I read this year. I am a big Friends fan. I'm rewatching Friends right now. I'm obsessed with Friends. Chandler's my favorite character. Hearing about what Matthew Perry went through and hearing his story and seeing what a good human being he is and how good of a person he is and how good of a heart he has, and hearing his struggles, it personifies addiction so well, because I think if so many people can look at an addict and be like, just stop, like why don't you just stop doing drugs? Or even some people who might do drugs recreationally that never get addicted, they might look at people who are addicted and be like, dude, why can't you just stop? Like just like stop taking drugs. And it is not easy. Addiction is a disease for people, and it is such a powerful book about showing how addiction is a disease from someone who had literally everything. He had, you know, fame, he had money, he had women, and it's the most heartbreaking book reading it, knowing that he has now passed. In the book, he talks about how his like deepest desire is to have a family and to, you know, wake up to the love of his life, and that is what he wants, like, and how he hopes that he's gonna have it, and he knows that one day he will, and knowing that he's passed without that makes me shattered into a million pieces. I've never thought about a book more. I've never thought about a person more. I've never felt so deeply about a celebrity's death than I have his. Anyways, that book just absolutely changed my life. I cannot stop thinking about it. I don't know if I ever will stop thinking about it. And even if you are a Friends watcher, if you're a Matthew Perry fan, whatever, you need to read this book. Like, his death didn't hit me as hard until I read this book, and now I legitimately cannot think about anything else. and it has absolutely broken my heart. And I wish that I knew him in person. Like, I genuinely wish that I knew him. And yeah, I haven't had a book that has hit me that hard in a really long time. So, if it's not obvious, I did rate this book 5 stars. And now, drum roll for the best book and the worst book. Tomato, tomato, tomato. Okay, so the best book that I read, I have a top 2. Without surprise, Friends, Lovers, and The Big Terrible Thing is one of the best books I've read. I don't think I can say all of those amazing things and then not have it be the best book, so that doesn't come as a shock. And then the second best book is actually a fiction book, and it is Happy Place. It was just so good. I was tied between that and Love and Other Words, but Happy Place was such a good romance, and maybe it's because I felt connected to the characters and, you know, put my own breakup experience and projected it onto this book. But I just really, really loved it, and I think everyone should read it. And usually these covers that are really colorful and cheesy, I kind of think less of, but no, guys, fiction is where it's at. Start getting into fiction this year. And the worst books that I read, if you guys find this shocking at all based on my review of them, is Spare by Prince Harry. Why did he write it? Who was guiding him? And then the next one is A Little Life, which might be controversial. I would love to know your opinion on A Little Life, but I really disliked it, and I felt angry that I wasted 800 something pages, because I do think that it prevented me from hitting my 40 books this year goal. So I'm also a little bitter towards it for that reason. But this video is so long, I didn't know how to condense it. I think next year I'll probably just do like best of 2024 instead of every book I've read. If you did like this video, please let me know, and I am always looking for book recommendations, so please leave your book recommendations down below. Let me know if you think I should start posting more videos about, you know, book talk or books and reading, then let me know. But thank you guys so much for watching, and I'll see you guys next time. Bye, guys.